Hey, I'm so glad you guys have joined me today. We're going to talk about toxic families. That's going to be the topic today. I'm so excited. I'm sorry, right now Instagram's not staring at anybody. I'm right now trying to pull something up on over here, and I have my docs off. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, sorry, I'm back, Instagram. Sorry about that. So, I'm right now live on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, and I'm so excited to be here today with all of you. We're going to talk about difficult family dynamics. I know a lot of us have been chatting with me over the past few weeks and months about your family, about what it's like to try to live in a kind of family like that. So let's get into that. Because a lot of us who've been in a romantic relationship, unfortunately, probably is dealing with toxicity in our extended family or maybe in our own family, or just because that's how many people are narcissistic, is that you can't avoid that group. You're going to end up encountering them in some level or not. So I'd love to get into that and talk to you about this. Make sure you put a thumbs up in your comments so that I know you're not just talking to each other, but that you're also talking to me. And I want to make an announcement that I have kind of difficult news, but I also have exciting news. So the difficult news is that the webinar with Lundy Bancroft has been canceled. Anybody who's purchased a ticket should have already received an email from me about that, offering your options. But in its place, I've already pivoted and put together an incredible team of panelists, and we're going to be discussing toxic families. And the topic, the topic of it is called, let me pull that up, Best Coping and Management Strategies for Toxic or Narcissistic Families. Best coping or management strategies when dealing with toxic or narcissistic families. And then the subtitle is Surviving the Chaos of a Narcissistic Family Member. And that includes, we're going to be having Lee Hammock, Bree Peterson of Abusive Abuse. It will also include Nia, How to Love a Battered Woman, Lisa Sunny with Stronger Than Before, SJ of La Disco Mama, SJ Coaching, and Ro of Roller Coaster Love is going to be the panelists. We're going to be talking about, again, toxic and narcissistic families. As you notice, all of those either have a family, like I was thinking of Lee, coping with him, living with him and his relationship with his children, or they have partners that they're trying to co-parent with, or they've come up through an abused or neglected home situation like myself, and Bree and Nia has, and maybe some of the other ones has as well. So I'm super excited. It's going to be the same time, same day, February 9th. So that's on sale now. The link is in my bio. So if you didn't get a ticket to Bancroft, but you think this is a better fit and maybe where you're at and you really would love to hear from this group, I'm going to make sure to add a larger Q&A to this portion, to this webinar, because a lot of you guys have great questions that you want to ask, and then maybe you've wanted to have contact with these creators, and this would be a way for you to actually be able to interact with them. Of course, anonymously through chat, but it's going to be an amazing, it's a lunchtime. It's going to be an amazing lunchtime. So I'm so sorry about the loss of Lundy Bancroft. I was really looking forward to hearing him, but I think this is a really fantastic alternative, and I'm super excited about that. So I hope you'll join us for that. Like I said, if you're interested, there's going to be a link. I know for YouTube, I need to put a link in. There's no link right now on YouTube, but I will make sure to put a link in the bio. Yeah, unfortunately, it's unforeseen circumstances. I really can't get into what happened except for just to leave it at that. I'll have to just leave it at that. And, we're going to make the best of it and move forward. So back to toxic families. In fact, I'm going to try to put a link in the bio or in over the chat over here on YouTube so YouTube can see it. And so how are you all doing? And I know, Brittany, would you ask the audience today how many of them have struggled with a toxic family member? I would love to hear how many of you are coping with that kind of situation right now in your life. And then I would love to know, here's a second poll question. The second polling question I have is I would love to know Who is it? Is it a sibling? Is it a parent? Maybe it's an in-law. Maybe it's an aunt or uncle. I would love to know, who are you guys struggling with? That would be really, really interesting. So I'm hoping YouTube is a lot faster, but I can already tell that it's not. The chat is out of sync, so I can't see how fast it's happening over there. But I am now able to read your guys' comments. I wish I didn't need glasses. That would be really nice. So, toxic families. Did you know that you can have a trauma bond with your family? How many of you do you think have struggled with a trauma bond? I have. I've struggled with a trauma bond with my mother. I didn't have one so much with my father, but I had a really intense one with my mother for most of my life. It was really, really, really painful. So I'm going to see what kind of comments you guys have been talking about. There's so many things that happen in family dynamics. So let me kind of back up and have a way to think about families. Families, you have to think of families like an organism. They operate like a body. So you have in a body, you've got the hands and what the arms are doing, or what the feet's doing, what the face is doing. And then they're all separate parts, but they work together in conjunction to each other. That's how family theory, family therapy thinks of families. They think of it as a system, like an organism. It itself is its own system, and it has its own rules within that system. It's very interesting. So that's kind of good news and bad news for us. It was good news because, well, I'll tell you the bad news first. The bad news part is because the families operate as a system, then that means that you are sort of consigned, almost like constricted. What's the word when the army doesn't volunteer you, but you're constricted? There's a word where you just you get called up and you have to serve. That's like that. You don't have a choice. You're born into this situation, or you marry into this situation, and then you're constricted into this, or fixed into this dynamic. You're drafted. Thank you. You're drafted into it, and you don't have a lot of choice about it. And they assign roles to you. You often don't even get to assign your own role. You may find out that you're seen as the one who walks on water, sort of the golden person. If you're an adult, like you marry into it, you're not obviously a child, but you can be sort of the golden in-law or the golden adult, or you suddenly are the scapegoat and you can't do anything right or do anything right. Or maybe you're the lost child, the lost one, and everybody you're invisible and you don't even get invited to things. They forget to send you the invitation. I remember one time my mother-in-law, this was awful. My mother-in-law, she always bought one gift for every family member and in-law in the family. And then there was the big to-do. It was like the one thing that happened at the Christmas is that she would pass these gifts out and then watch everybody open that gift that she passed out. She didn't get me a gift. And you know what's even worse? No one noticed. Not only did she not get me a gift, but no one noticed that she didn't give me a gift. It wasn't until I was in my ride home with my family and I looked over to my late husband and said, "Your mom didn't get me anything this year." "What?" Yeah, no, she forgot me this year." "Oh, man." But you know what? He didn't say anything. That didn't bode well either, although... that's painful, isn't it? So it's interesting. So that's the bad news. You're drafted into this situation. You're assigned a role, whether or not you want the role or not. And then it kind of all just sort of plays out. And thank you so much for the gift, Boy Blair. I really appreciate that. But here's the good news. Because it's an organism, and I want to, again, think of a body. So if you're a body and suddenly you stub your toe, or maybe even you break a toe, that toe is affecting the whole body. Everything that's occurring within that body is now affected by that one area. It impacts the whole organism. So the same thing happens with family dynamics. So if you change, you're changing the family. They're forced to change because you're changing. So that's sort of the good news, is that you can, if you want to be sort of malicious about it, throw a wrench in the whole thing and make things very difficult by being different, by behaving different. But the hard part is, because of the dynamics, the pressure is so intense that it's very, very hard to do that. And often that's what family therapy would work on, is like how to help you sort of do something in a different way to have an impact on the family. But you'll get a lot of pressure, a lot of pushback, because Think of this again. Let's think of our bodies again. That's a really great kind of way to conceptualize this. The body has a way of being. It's called homeostasis. It's sort of a normal state. It likes normal. It may not be a healthy normal, but it likes what it's used to. So when you change, it's changing the way that the body it kind of works, and it doesn't like it. So it's going to put pressure so that you guys go back to being the way you were before. So it's very, very difficult. So it's going to be super, super intense. So we just asked a poll over here on TikTok about how many family members do you struggle with that are toxic? Fascinating, more than one, 66.7% of you, 2/3 of you are struggling with more than one person who's a toxic family member in your life. Is that true for you guys over on Instagram? Are you struggling with more than one as well? Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear that. Yeah, or YouTube. I'm sorry. I hope that you guys are seeing me and hearing me. Brittany, can you check if that's possible and then text me, let me know that that's happening? I'd really, really appreciate that. I'm always like, is this really working? I hope this is working, but especially when the delay is as bad as it is. Yeah. So Charlotte just wrote on TikTok, my homeostasis her normal is being ignored and her needs don't get met. And now she looks for that in a relationship. See, here's the hard part about that, Charlotta, is that because it's been a role that you've had, you now have learned that role. You may hate it, but you've learned to go with it. So when you get into a relationship with somebody, you're going to accidentally sort of anticipate that same behavior. So you'll either swing like overly intense, trying to make sure it doesn't happen, or you'll accidentally sort of like fall into it and behave as if it is happening even when it's not. That's the hard part, is we get these roles become normalized for us. I would love to hear what role you guys all had in your family. And by the way, let me kind of just the glass child idea. Oh, can you say more about that, Charlotte? I would love to hear more about that. And thank you so much for that gift, Jed. Yeah, I would love you to hear about that, the glass child. So here's some roles. And I'm sure I'm going to miss some roles. The common roles that happen in families are the golden child, which is the person that can kind of do no wrong, and they're always like perfect, and they're held up as the example for the family. Then there is the clown, and that's the one, usually that's the youngest. That's the one that sort of just keeps the family laughing and distracted and acts like comic relief. My late husband played the clown in his family. There's the lost child. The lost child, that was my sister, and it's often the middle child. The lost child's the child that's sort of invisible, sort of disappears. They're the one that's always sinks themselves into TV or a video game, or back in the day when I was growing up, it was a book. My sister was always in her room reading a book. Then you often have the caretaker, the parentified adult. That's what Mimi Lee just said. Yeah, exactly. And that was me. I played that role to some level, where they lean on you like you're a surrogate parent, put you in charge of your siblings, and then kind of expect you to do a lot more than you should. And then there's the scapegoat, which is also in clinical terms referred to as the identified patient. That's usually the person who's seen as the problem. Or black sheep. That's also the scapegoat, as a black sheep. So there's the rebel, or maybe they're the one with the problems, or they're the one that just is sort of the dorky, clumsy, nerdy, always in trouble or always weird or on the outside of something. Now, interestingly enough about the scapegoat, and I was the scapegoat a lot in my family, scapegoats often are truth tellers. I don't know if you knew that. They often are the ones who sort of see things as they are. And because of that, one way to sort of shut that down and to disqualify that information is to make them the odd man out. It's a great way to hush it up. And the other thing about scapegoats is they act as a pressure valve for the family. Usually there's a lot of toxicity or unhealthiness happening, dysfunction happening in the family. So they focus on the scapegoat as a way to offset the pressure they're feeling in the family. So you don't need to talk about the fact that the parents aren't working well and that there's a lot of bubbling anger between them and that maybe communication is really bad, they'll just focus on Junior or on Sissy, who's a problem or is not doing well at school or, came home late again today or whatever the issue is. They end up being the one that's focused on instead of the ones that should be focused on. Exactly. It's interesting also that roles shift. So did you experience that in your family? Were you sometimes the lost child or the golden child and turn around and you ended up being the scapegoated, or maybe you ended up being the clown? Did you find that your sense that you sort of shifted roles? I did. I flipped between parentified child, the parent, the surrogate parent, and also the scapegoat. Interestingly, here's another thing that sort of worked against me. And by the way these roles get assigned is really mysterious. It's wild. It's usually for a combination of reasons, like it's how the parents sort of feel about you when when you're born. It's sometimes the way you look, or maybe some of the mannerisms that you happen to have. It may be the way that you kind of emotionally impact the parent. It's really fascinating. It's not always for legitimate reasons. So let me give you an example how it happened in my family. I often was sort of the surrogate mother because I look like my mom's mom. So she's now deceased, but if you saw images of her and me side by side, and if I didn't have any makeup, my hair pulled back, I look eerily like my grandmother. And so for my mom, it was a very easy to assign me that role just because of the familiarity that I had, the fact that I triggered that for her. Yeah. So in TikTok, we just took a poll, which family member is toxic? And 17% of you said it's the parent. 17%, it's interesting. 17% of you said it's the in-laws. And then 2/3 said it's some combination of one of the aboves. Fascinating. That's really fascinating. Yeah. So Brittany was saying she was the only child and she ended up having multiple roles, but as adult, she now is primarily the lost child. Yeah, I also was the oldest. That's another good point that Jealous Pianist is making, is that being the eldest child, it's easy to assign them as the parentified role just because they're the oldest, to put them in charge of things. You sort of see that on the TV show The Waltons, Not the oldest boy, it was the oldest girl. Mary Ellen, I don't know if you guys watch it, I may be really dating myself, but Mary Ellen often was the one put in charge of the kids. So it's kind of common to do that. So, great question on Instagram just came in. Why do parents do this? Why do they do this? Well, they do this because the family dynamic, their relationship, remember, so the family started out with the two of them. They're the original family. And, thank you, Janine. I appreciate that. So the original family was mom and dad. It came together and formed this relationship, and wasn't going really great. Maybe it was a little shaky. And so as a result of the shakiness, the glass child Charlotta said the glass child's the lost child or the golden child. I'll have to research that because I've never heard that term. But it reminds me of fragile. That's what I think of when I hear the word fragile. But let me go back into what happens. So mom and dad get together. They have this relationship. They're not on the best footing. Maybe they're not doing really great with conflict resolution. Maybe there's financial pressures. Maybe they don't really know how to talk to each other. Maybe there's, maybe one of them's a narcissist and there's some narcissistic abuse going on, but things aren't healthy. That's the problem. Things aren't healthy. And then baby number one comes into the world. And suddenly they're now not just the two of them, they're the three of them. And that changes the dynamics. And by the way, threes are always a rough combination because that sets it perfectly up for triangulation. Have you guys heard of triangulation before? So let's stop there for a second. Let's talk about triangulation. So Brittany says the glass child is a sibling who gets forgotten because the other child's sick and in trouble a lot. Oh, interesting. Yeah, that is a common dynamic. So let me kind of say that again. So my oldest son battled leukemia. And when that happened, obviously I stopped focusing on the other two kids. They would have gotten forgotten because all the focus now they were adults when this happened, but all the focus was going in on my son who was battling cancer. And, the family dynamics really, really change when that happens. Yeah, I can see that happening. Yeah, and so as a result of that, then the other kids just don't get the kind of attention they may need. That's fascinating. Makes total sense. Thank you for sharing that, Brittany. So let's go back to family dynamics. So triangulation, I want to stop and pause and talk about triangulation. So triangulation, think of like a stool. Like a stool. Yeah, he's in remission. We have one more year to go and we can say he's cured. Somebody asked, how's my son doing? So yeah, I'm thrilled that he's now, in remission. That's awesome. But think of a stool. A two-legged stool obviously doesn't work. You can't sit on a two-legged stool. Obviously, a four-legged stool would even be more stable. But three legs starts to stabilize a unstable situation. So if you got two people who are together and they're not stable and suddenly a third person comes into the mix, it stabilizes things, but in a bad way. So say that first they can't talk to each other. What they'll do, they'll talk to the third person instead of talking to each other. They'll run to that third person. That so-and-so is really upsetting me. I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Can you believe that? Would that upset you too? Now, granted, with a child, with a baby, you can't do that. But what you can do is you can emotionally latch on to the child and start to use the child to meet your needs that you don't feel you're getting your needs met through the relationship. Or the person who's angry could latch onto the child as the problem for things between the two of them, instead of realizing the problem between the two of them are because the two of them have problems, not because of the baby being sort of in the situation. So yeah, user 3743 whatever says I thought triangulation was normal. No, it's always pathological. It's always pathological. Yeah, because you're not dealing with each other directly. You're communicating using the third person to communicate through the difficulties, or going to the third person to get your needs that you should be getting met through the other person, for the primary person. Breezy Bree wants to know, do we save the lives? Absolutely. Right now I'm streaming live on YouTube, which then will go into sort of a playlist of lives, and this one will be one of those lives. So yes, absolutely. And I'll make sure to tag it on the thumbnail so that you know that we're talking about toxic family dynamics. So like, oh yeah, this one is the one she was using all of these, talking about these dynamics. So that way you can find it when you want to find it. And thank you for that. Thanks for asking that. It always helps, guys, when you go and watch my YouTube content. It's good for me when you do that. I really appreciate that. And Resmail says that she's in remission as well. And that is awesome. I'll tell you, and now we're on a side note for a second. Cancer, there's so much misconception about what cancer is and what it's like to survive it. And I've survived. My late husband died of cancer, and then my oldest was diagnosed with leukemia. My late husband had duodenal cancer, very rare, small intestinal, not colon, small intestinal cancer, which is extremely rare, literally always terminal. It was terminal in his case. And then my oldest child was diagnosed on the same day, 3 years, was it 3 years? Maybe 4 years after his dad died. He was diagnosed on the same day as his dad's death anniversary. How awful. That was June 10th is a rough day for me. It's a rough day. That was the day that I lost my husband in 2015, and that was the day in 2019 that my oldest was diagnosed with leukemia. Man. Yeah, and then to have that to both, two family members with very serious, my son's type of leukemia is not the type that tends to get cured, by the way. It's only been due to the recent advancements in acute myeloid leukemia that he's alive. Used to be, he would have died if he had gotten it 10 years ago. The type he had was nearly always terminal. And because of just recent advancements, like a year or two before he's diagnosed, they had this big, massive breakthrough in the chemotherapy treatment. And it benefited him, and that's why he's here. So I'm so thankful for science. And in fact, there was 40 years of time that they made no advancements in that area of leukemia. No advancements. It was like no researcher wanted to research this type of leukemia because it was like boring. I mean, there was nothing happening in it. And then suddenly the genetics were unlocked, and they made these huge advancements. And now it's probably one of the areas they're making really big advancements in the treatment of AML, acute myeloid leukemia. So yeah, I'm thrilled. Okay, so triangulation. Let's go back to triangulation. Yeah, no, triangulation is never a good thing. You see it all the time. You see it all the time with children when they tattle. Mom, he's stepping on my toe, or she pulled my hair. That is. Yeah. Oh, your brother had AML. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so whenever you hear tattling is triangulation. It's the two kids or three kids who are fighting, and then they go to a third person, a more powerful person, in order to sort of rally or utilize the power of the other person. So triangulation can happen for lots of reasons. It can happen because you want to strengthen your weak position. That's what we do when we're tattling. It could be as a way to get our needs met that we feel we're not getting met in the main relationship. That's what if we lean out and sort of like start to coddle a baby in place of getting love from the marriage or from the primary relationship. That's sort of for emotional reasons. It also can be a way that we deal with conflict. So you can run to another person as a way to offload your upsetness, or you can assign the upsetness to the third person and make them the scapegoat for the relationship. So baby number one comes into the family. It's not a healthy family. It's some like toxicities happening. It's unstable. And the third person now arrives, and woof, now they got triangulation going on. And they probably may or may not have assigned a role to that child. The child's baby right now, so that would be probably not really happen yet. But baby number two comes, or baby number 2 and 3 comes. And they start to grow up, and then they start to notice, oh, this child's always so easygoing. Oh, or maybe this child's skilled at a certain thing that mom and dad loves. Maybe they show early musical talent, or they're talking early. Or maybe they pick up that ball and it looks like they're going to be really good with the football or really good with baseball or softball. And next thing you know, you've got one child's now being assigned to the golden child, and then maybe the other child's kind of a little slow and doing little things awkward. Now, my kids and I all have autism. And so we're a little on the clumsy side. I spill stuff. I'm always like dropping food down my shirt. Nobody told me until I was adulthood that lean forward and you don't dribble so much. So even now, like I'm catching things in my hair and I'm always, it's just awful. And that drove my parents nuts, drove them nuts. So maybe you have a child like that who just kind of does a little quirky thing that you just, for whatever reason, is your issue. Next thing you know, you've got a scapegoat. And maybe you got a kid who's just sort of easygoing and floats on the edges and sort of manages their stuff all on their own. And they're easy to kind of ignore. And before you know it, you've got a lost child. That's kind of how it happens. It's sort of randomly assigned based upon a wild, like set of fluky circumstances that doesn't always make a lot of sense. And nor is it fair. It's never fair. Like I said, you got drafted into this family. You didn't have a choice. This wasn't because, oh yeah, I really want to be a golden child. That's what I want to be, the princess. No, absolutely not. In fact, I know that golden children do not have it any easier. Those of us who see that, we think, oh, wow, how lucky to be them. No, it's not lucky being them either, because they know it's not really based on who they are. They know that it is temporary based on some quality they probably don't have a lot of control over. And the weight of that is so huge, they feel like burdened, weighed down with it. And they know as fast as it could be assigned, it would get given away. How do I know? Because I was my grandmother's golden child. So I was my parents' scapegoat, but my grandmother's golden child. And she made sure everyone knew it. And you know what? I knew I never deserved it. I never deserved it. I hated it. It scared me. I knew it was based on something that I had no idea. I knew it wasn't earned. And I knew that I could lose it just as easily and just as fast as I was assigned, because I watched how fickle she was about everybody. Right. Yeah. You're the man just says, this sucks. You work your ass off. Absolutely. Absolutely. Golden child is working their ass off to try to hold it up. Whatever it is, whether it's to being the perfect athlete or the perfect student or the perfect whatever, they're working so hard, and they know it's so fragile that it could be lost just as fast as it was given, because it was never based on who they are. And they don't feel seen. That's the other thing. Everybody who's assigned these roles do not feel seen. They feel really misaligned and terribly underappreciated, really, really injured. So yeah, it's a lose-lose for the kids. It's really, the only ones who win is the ones who are doing it for their own emotional dysfunctional needs. And they would say they're not winning either. They would say, well, it doesn't really work, but yet they don't do any other thing. So yeah. What kind of questions do you guys have around this as I've been talking about it? Is anything that maybe didn't make sense or you'd like me to kind of circle back about? I will talk about how to change it. I won't talk about what you can do if you're a minor because that's much, much tougher. And so for those who are here who are had maybe teenagers in the audience, I'm sorry, it's gonna not really address your struggle, but I do want to talk about what to do with if we're adults and we still get assigned to one of these roles, what we can do about it. So any questions, kind of put your thumbs up and let me know what your questions are about this. So Brittany's asking, how do you accept when a parent discards you in order to live with their own bubble? Yeah. That's really tough. Yeah, it is tough. And then Rocky said, my dad rejected me, would make everyone think that it was me, and the whole side of the family barely talks. That's fascinating. So let's talk about that. And you can break the curse by forgiveness and talking to them about God's leading. I appreciate that, Sunflower Girl. We don't talk about religion here just because we kind of keep it focused on mental health related issues, but I do appreciate your belief in that. And the fact that you have faith like that, but we're gonna leave that to side for right now. But generation, yeah, they can be changed. They like fixed behaviors, problematic, dysfunctional, generational fixed behaviors certainly can be changed by changed behaviors. Absolutely. So can parents use a golden child as narcissistic plot? Absolutely, Zane. Absolutely. Very, very much so. When you're golden and your siblings rip you down, how do you stop the ripping down? Oh, that's another great question. Okay, we got a lot of great questions. So let's start back at the top, which the top one was, what do we do when the family decides that you're not playing your role well enough and starts to punish you for that by discarding you, ignoring you, or whatever? So one of the things that happens here is, again, remember that couple wasn't doing well. So they're stabilizing themselves by using the family dynamics as a way to offload, distract, kind of maybe even supply themselves with what's happening in the family. When you stop playing your role, when you stop functioning in that way, they're going to give you a change message. And the change message is usually some pressure. They may even have other people gang up on you for them, on their sake. And the point is they want to stabilize themselves by getting you back into the role that you were playing before. And if you don't, then the ultimate punishment for that would be rejection or discard. Yeah, absolutely. And that is really, really tough. But so I want to say to all of us, as we get healthier here and we start to function, well, you may suffer that. Let me give you an example. So my family was pretty enmeshed. And we did things as a group, and there was these subtle rules to the group. And one of them was we used to go to take trips to Canada, and on the way back we would stop at this. It was a great store. I loved it. It was a souvenir shop, and it sold high-end things. It wasn't just one of those touristy sort of it sold soapstone statues and stuff, really beautiful things, but fragile things. And it had plates and all sorts of really unique things. Well, when my young oldest was born and 2 years old, he was a pistol. I mean, remember I told you they're autistic. So he looked like he had ADHD. He didn't, but he looked like it. He was super, super busy. Couldn't not put his hands on things. So my family would stop at this place and spend an hour or more. Can you imagine me racing around trying to keep up with them, trying not to have my 2-year-old break something in the store? It was miserable. So when we got done with the first trip, I said to my father on the side, I said, Dad, hey, next time we go to Canada next year, I think my family will just stop in, say hi and bye, and then we'll go on home. This is just too hard to handle my oldest here. It's just too much challenging. This is what my dad said. He said, then I think it's best you just don't come next year. That's what will happen when you start to set healthier boundaries. You will get an extreme, retaliatory pushback message because the organism doesn't, again, think of the organism. It doesn't want to change. So say for example, let's use your body again. Say you have a really bad way of walking and you're damaging your knee. And you get to the place where your knee says, this is not going to work. You have to do it differently. Well, you don't want that knee to behave differently. You want it to behave the way it is always behaved and the way you like it to, even though maybe it's not good for you. So you're going to be kind of crabby about that. Well, we do the same thing on family members. We get crabby with them and we'll begin to put pressuring on them. And a great way to have pressure is simply just to say, you're not going to be a part of us. That's the ultimate threat. Nobody likes rejection, so rejection is the ultimate threat. Now, sometimes that's literal. They mean it. You will be rejected, and you got to be prepared for that risk. Sometimes, if you hold your ground, they want the relationship more, and they will then capitulate. So which way it falls? Now, in my family, my father didn't hold his ground. We were more important. I wasn't going to do it again. So I didn't capitulate, and he then never brought it up again, and it just sort of got dropped. So sometimes it's a bluff. Sometimes you can play it out and see what happens, but it can be really, really tough. So let me take the next question that came up, because that's a really great question. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it was over here where you're the one man said that. So what happens when, about narcissistic supply, let's do that. So parents do use their children for narcissistic supply. Absolutely. Absolutely. All the time. If you got a toxic parent, you got a narcissist or a personality disorder as one of your parents, absolutely. They're using everybody as supply, not just the romantic partner, but it was going to be everybody who's going to end up being used that way. Kids, especially kids, because they're there and they're usually amenable and they're usually, they're invested. They have this incredible relationship. So yes, that's very, very, and they don't know. They really don't know any difference. So it's just their easy supply, unfortunately. So what happens when you are whatever, you're the one man. It's not only the golden child that siblings tear down, but the scapegoat gets tore apart by siblings as well. So what happens with that? Well, here's another kind of sad dynamic about relationships. Power is super attractive. We all know that. And so if we see bullying happening, and let's take the scapegoat for a second. If the parents are bullying the scapegoat, it's easy for everybody then to think that that's fair game and them to jump into it, because for one, it's aligning with the parent, which strengthens their connection. It kind of makes them in with that toxic parent, gets the approval, and is sort of, they become part of the group feeling, sort of camaraderie in a sick way that happens. But also, it's a way for them to offload their anger and frustration. I'll never forget, and this is one of the most painful things I ever saw in my life. There was a family that I knew who had scapegoated one of their middle kids. And this kid was scapegoated by everybody in that family. He was the butt of the joke in that family. For his graduation, that family actually held at the church a graduation party that they called a roast. And then they invited the public to come and roast this kid. So not just for the siblings and for them to roast him. They wanted everybody to roast this kid. And believe it or not, people did it. So sometimes scapegoats get, the power, the circle of influence is not just, and this was in a church, guys. This was not, a church did this. A church member. It was awful. I was so upset, really upset. And I worry about this kid sometimes. He's now a grown adult. I wonder how well he's doing. But you can get the dynamic to sort of be that large, that huge. But yeah, so when you're the golden child, it happens similarly. Because you end up being the one that's sort of the special one, then everybody wants you not to be so special. So ripping you down is a great way to make you not special. But how do you stop it? Now, there's the tricky part. You can't really stop what other people are doing. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of power. We only have the power of what we have control over, and we can't make people do something different. Our choice is what we're going to do with what they're doing. So are we going to stay when they start to rip you apart? Are you going to walk away? That's what I would focus on. I would focus on your options in that moment, what you're going to do to sort of cope with it. Same with scapegoat. I would also decide what your options are. So this is what my late husband and I decided to do just before he got ill. So we knew that I was being scapegoated in different situations. Unfortunately, that sort of happens. You kind of carry these labels forward. I hate that. And so he and I made a plan. And he said, when it starts to happen, and I agreed with him, this is what we're going to do as a couple. We're going to walk out as a couple. We're going to say goodbye and we're going to walk out. and be polite about it. And I thought that was a very fair reaction, and that's what we did going forward. Whenever we saw it started up, and then when he saw a toxic dynamic happening, he said he was going to intervene. And actually, we set up a triangulation was what we did. If he noticed it was happening, he was going to break it and then distract that person. And he did, and it was really, really effective. So sometimes it's really helpful to get your partner in on it and create a plan like that. So somebody wanted to know, does the golden child have a greater propensity to become a narcissist down the road? I think they're at risk. I don't think that's 100%. Yes, they'll become narcissistic. It kind of depends on a lot of factors. It depends on their genetics. It's a lot of factors, but it does put them at risk. Definitely. I had another thought about, yeah, you do see that it can happen, but I think, Brittany, it's happening partly also because of genetics. So, I mean, I was a golden child with my grandmother and I wasn't, but I was scapegoated in my own family. So, yeah, I was thinking if there was another direction I was heading that I'm trying to remember. I hate that. I had a really good idea about where to go, and now I can't think of it. So I'm going to watch your guys' comments for. Yeah, Brittany, what you may have been witnessing is that the golden children that you've been around actually were reminiscent of the parent who's narcissistic. And so that's one reason why they were golden, is because of the similarities of remember I said it's being assigned for very mysterious kind of unconscious reasons. It could be that parent recognized that child's propensity and really liked it and sort of relished it and then built it up, So it's hard to know. These things are really, it's easy to say, oh, it's overindulgence, but when you start to research a variable like that, it's considered a variable. When you start to research a variable like that, you may suddenly find that there are all these other variables that come in and play that you aren't controlling for, and that could have very, very damaging effects. And Rocky said, I don't understand how I, even as a child, had done nothing to my family or to my parent dad who hurt them. I know, that's what I'm saying. It gets assigned for very weird reasons. It's not fair at all. It's not because you deserved it. It's not because, but here's the sad part. It can become fulfilling though. That's the hard part, is that just sort of like what Brittany's saying, if you're golden and you think you're perfect, and then it could become self-fulfillment, that then you become narcissistic. Or if you're the scapegoat and you think you do nothing right, you then could have permanent imposter syndrome and then never fully embrace your life because you're scared. Or you may struggle with other situations and social events because you think everybody's going to also do that there. So then it holds you back and you develop this anxiety, and you don't take the risks you could have if you had not had that happen. That's the hard part of all of this, is that it can become something that you incorporate and make it a part of your own identity. That's what I saw with this young man that I was talking about, who was roasted by his family. He was hard to like, honestly. He was a hard to like person. Now, was that because his parents from the get-go said he's odd, and then that just sort of or was he always like that? And you don't know. And we can't tease that out. It's not going to be able to. You can't go back here's a great. So you ever hear the book called The Boys from Brazil? The Boys are for. I didn't read it, but I know what it's about. And it's written, I think it's like in the 60s or 70s or something. Boys in Brazil is like, what if you were trying to have another Adolf Hitler? What if they cloned him and they had so many boys of him that were him, and they raised him, and they were trying to create another Adolf Hitler? The point of the book was, you can clone Adolf, but it doesn't mean he'll be another Hitler. Because the circumstances that created Hitler were so unique, you'd have to have all those things happen again. That's like, let me blow you away with another comment. You did not grow up in the same family that your brother or sister did. You didn't. If you're the oldest child, you were born into a family with just 2 adults. If you're the youngest kid, you're born into a family with lots of people. But every child was born into a different constellation with a different set of people in that constellation. None of the kids, unless they were twins, were born into the same family. Everybody's experience was a little different. So it's very hard to replicate these situations or to fully understand all the variables that are in play that set up the situation. So Zane wants to say, how can I say more how a golden child is used as narcissistic supply for the parent? So yeah, so if narcissists who are super fragile egos are constantly looking for, they're propping their shakiness up, their insecurities up, their avoidance of their shame up by having all this this attention, this focus. So one way, if they're feeling like, let's pretend just for kicks and giggles, and because it's a common dynamic we see a lot, and it's almost a meme, it's so common we've almost done that. Let's take that we have a father and he's got an athletic son who's doing really well in football, and this father is living through this son. So say dad is not doing as well as he should have at work. He feels real beaten down. Say his wife, the love bombing's through. He's now disillusioned with her, so he's not getting good supply. Maybe he doesn't have time for cheating, so he's not out there getting it with some other woman. So it would be really easy for him to throw all of himself into that boy and everything about that boy's football career, and then make that the focus. And then that gives him a distraction, kind of distracts him from the rough stuff of his life. It also, whenever that child does something great and everybody like roars and all this attention, he's like, yep, that's my boy. I spent all that. And he's there because of me. I did that. It's very easy for them to sort of garner all of the attention the child's getting and have it come back to them. So, and it's just, they live through that person. They're living through that person and owning those experiences. Instead of seeing it that due to the boy's own achievements, they take ownership of the achievements, and that's the supply. So it acts as a distraction. It acts as a supply. It also, it kind of fixes everything that's sort of wrong with this person. I hope that helps, Zane. I hope that gives you a little bit more information. But yeah, exactly. Brittany, you're exactly right. The scapegoat does the same. The scapegoat is a negative supply. They're the inverse of it. They do the opposite. So so let's take that dad and let's make the boy as a problem. A rebel. Maybe he's a rebel. Dad has a rough day at work. Things aren't going well. He comes home and he finds out, Junior skipped school today. And so it's really great to not focus on his own failures as a person working as an adult and not knowing how to connect with his partner, his wife, or his spouse. Instead, he's focused on Junior all the time because it's just Junior's such a problem. So again, it offers a distraction, but it also offers a way for him to deal with his issues, his conflict, his shame. He's focusing through that child. Yeah, so Anastasia says, thank you. It may sound crazy, but I'm going through a hard time. And Anastasia, I'll do what I can. That's the hard part. This is a side note to everybody. I don't counsel these days. And it's very hard to due to the number of requests that I get, it's very, very hard to sort of focus on any one person. But I do offer clarity calls for one time. If you want 15 minutes with me, you can book a session and we can at least maybe point you some directions. But I'll do what I can, Anastasia. But I don't counsel these days, unfortunately. So let's kind of wrap. I've still got 10 minutes or so to go. Let's talk about enmeshment versus disengagement. And have you guys both have heard those terms? And I'm looking at the comments over My Monkey Do. All those titles diminish inside a family as we age together. Perhaps one of the variable moves out of state. Can even death inside a narc family reorder those titles? I think so, Monkey Do. I do think that things are constantly changing. You will see as people, here's the fascinating thing. Some personality disorders as they get older mellow, and some personality disorders as they get older get more intense and problematic. So kind of depends on what happens with inside the family. Like in my own family, we just lost my sister. So we lost my father in 2011. And so then it was my mom and the three of us. And in a way, a lot of the family dynamics stayed the same. And then when my sister passed away this summer, now it's just the three of us, and it is reordering things. I can tell that we're shifting. I don't know what it takes time. It will have to sort of settle for us to figure out our new roles. But my sister and I, the living sister and I, are changing. Our relationship is changing. And my relationship with my mom and her, the two of us, her two daughters are changing. So yeah, it does reorder things. I saw it with my own family. I really worked hard not to have rigid roles in my family. Really worked to avoid it. But it's still, the death of my late husband was very disruptive and really unsettled us for more than a year. We were in a shaky spot and a lot of intensity. One of the things that people don't talk about with grief is that there's a lot of anger with grief, a lot of rage. There's a creator who just lost her dad unexpectedly on January 1st, and I've been watching her content, and I can see the rage, and I'm sure nobody told her, be prepared, honey, when someone dies, that you're going to be angry for a very long time. I certainly was. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for considering being a subscription, guys. Both groups across all of platforms. There is a subscription. It's an online community with me. In fact, this week, and it's going to be Thursday night, we're having our hour and a half long. It's an hour between that hour and a half long monthly video chat where we just hang out. We don't really necessarily talk about heavy things. We just sort of talk about our life and how we're doing and update ourselves. But we also have a Discord group and we share deeper stuff, what's going on. And we have a Facebook group we kind of used more for superficial communication. So if that's something you're interested in, having more contact with me, but also having more contact with other people who are inside this community, it's a great way to do it, a very safe way to do it. So by subscribing, you get to that, you're automatically invited both to Discord and a face group and then that monthly video chat group. And I'm on all platforms, Monkey Do. I'm on, well, not all of them. I'm not very active on Twitter, and I'm not very active on LinkedIn. But you can find me, Kerry McAvoy, PhD, on Instagram, on YouTube. YouTube now is my primary channel. So that's where the freshest, newest content's coming out is YouTube first. It used to be TikTok, but sorry, TikTok. It's now YouTube. So, yeah. But grief is a really, really rough thing. So thank you for those of you considering being a subscriber. Thank you so much for that. But yeah, grief is really, really rough, really rough. And we don't talk enough about it. It's like we all pretend. Here's the ironic part. So let me give you a little story, and then I'm going to talk about enmeshment and disengagement. So on the day that my husband learned that he was dying, because when we heard he had a duodenal cancer, there's not treatment for that. It's other than massive surgery. He did have the surgery, but it failed. The surgery was unsuccessful. So the day he learned he was dying, and he did know he was dying, that morning, a 15-year-old was supposed to be going to school. The parents were estranged, probably in getting a divorce, and the 15-year-old missed the bus. So he contacted dad, who wasn't living at home because mom was already gone, to come pick him up and get him to school. Well, dad thought that he saw the bus ahead of them, and he thought, well, why not just catch the bus, and instead of having to drop the kid off at school because dad's on his way to work, and this kid's sort of disrupting his plans. So dad drops the 15-year-old off near the bus to catch the bus for school, and the bus driver didn't see him and hit him and killed him. And that's the day my husband learned he was dying. A 15-year-old was killed by his own bus that morning. Now, I'm sure everybody thought that 15-year-old had for forever. I thought my 52-year-old husband had at least another 30 years in him. But we really never know how long we've got. Our days could be numbered tomorrow, or we could have another 40, 50 years ahead of us. And we really don't know. That 15-year-old didn't know that was his last day, nor did my husband that morning he woke up know that he had only 5.5 months more to live. We don't know. So, but yes, we don't talk about it. We always think it's like out there. It's never going to happen. It's way out there. It's not. It's closer than you think. Or it's closer to one of your family members than you think. And we should get prepared for it. We really should. We should know how to cope. What grief looks like, how to create space for grief, what to do for those who are I'll tell you, everyone around me when I lost my Brad and then when Cameron was dying, oh man, they don't know what to say. Nobody knows what to say. They're the most awkward and they say the worst stuff and they don't, and you know they don't mean to. And then you have to do all the hard work of not like lashing out because you're in pain and you don't have a lot of energy and you're trying to hold it together. And now you have to be kind to somebody you have no energy to be kind to. puts everybody in a bad spot. We should really learn to be better around grief. Okay, let's talk about enmeshment and disengagement, and then we'll wrap it up for today. And again, I hope if you found this interesting today, I hope you will come to the webinar on February 9th. We're going to talk about best coping and management strategies for toxic families when you have a toxic family member. It's going to be with a large panel of creators who all have experience with either being in a toxic family or growing up in a toxic family. You can get a link in my bio about that. I would love to see you there. But enmeshment and disengagement. So let's imagine a house. And I want you to imagine two types of houses. One is a one-room cabin, and the other one is a 10,000 square foot rich house up on some hill, okay? Those are what families, dysfunctional families will flux between one of those two extremes. They won't be both. They'll be one or the other, and they'll never be the other. Once they fix themselves, they're always that one way. The one-room cabin is called enmeshment, and that is the most popular type. So most of us have grown up in an enmeshed family. Enmeshed families, imagine that one-room cabin, and you got a lot of people in it. What happens is that they then come to what's called one group thinking. They operate as a group. There's so it's called a undifferentiated ego mass. They become an undifferentiated ego mass. How do you love that for a word? So there's pressure for everybody to conform to that one consensus, the one group. When they're stressed, they glom together and they do everything together. They operate almost like one organism. Again, think of a one-room cabin with no privacy. It's like that's how they operate. Now, so whenever they're stressed, they clump together and they think together. They lose their autonomy. The great thing is they got support, but there's no autonomy. There's no individualism. And when you start to operate as an individual, they put pressure on you to stop doing that. That's enmeshment. Now, on the opposite end is disengagement. That's the 10,000 square foot house. Now, think of that house. If you got a family, say you have a normal, let's say we have four-member family. Well, you'd get lost in a 10,000 square foot house. I mean, yeah, not only would there be bedrooms, there'd be suites for everybody practically. So what families do who are disengaged is when pressure happens, stress happens, they scatter, they run off, they separate. So there's extreme amount of individuality in disengaged family, but there's not good support. They don't know how to come together. They avoid togetherness. They prefer isolation. So most of us, interestingly enough, usually come from an enmeshed family. We usually don't come from disengaged. Disengaged is not at least in a lot of cultures, not a very popular way of dealing with stress, but they're both there. I'll never forget, I went through a house tour and it was a large home, it was huge, and it had a sign down at the basement and it says, "We all have our spaces and places." And my thought was, yep, this is a disengaged family. Disengaged family. And yet I know a lot of people like to do these tiny homes or maybe living out of a van, and I was I hope they're not enmeshed, but that looks a little enmeshed to me. So I'd be curious, did you grow up in a disengaged family or did you grow up in an enmeshed family? Yeah, well, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Now, I want to remind you of Thursday. Thursday, come in here at 1 o'clock. We're going to do breath recentering. It's going to be centering breath exercises. I'm going to teach you 3 of them. I'm going to teach you, one is called boxed breathing. We're going to talk about boxed breathing. Then there's also a centering breath exercises, and then we're going to use a breath prayer. Even though I say we're not talking religion, I'm going to actually, for those of you who have a spiritual belief, I'm going to teach you how to do breath prayer as well. So we'll cover 3 types of centering breaths in the guided mind-body reconnection experience on Thursday. It starts right away at 1 o'clock. So come dressed comfortable, be in a chair that you can kind of lean, or maybe even on a couch where you can lean back and breathe and focus on yourself. This is going to be an experience, we're not going to do a lot of dialogue until the experience is over. Then we can talk about what happened and your experience of what happened. But come prepared to do this with me, to learn how to use your breath to recenter yourself and to re-regulate yourself. And I'm so excited about it. It's going to be a fascinating time. We're going to have a really good time together. So thank you so much. A lot of you are coming and telling me you grew up in a disengaged family. I find that fascinating. I find that really, I'm surprised, actually. Yeah, my family was enmeshed. So, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, poor YouTube. I just now saw my chat that I put up at 106 just popped in. So that's that's why I've not chatted with you on chat over there. It's because it's not working. I need a new system. I've been trying to use OBS and it's not working. All right, you guys, thank you so much for today. I'm going to wrap it up. I'll be back here on Thursday for that. Make sure if you want to come to that webinar about family dynamics, if you like today, this is going to be even more, greater and better than what you had today. So, and if you want a replay of this, go over to YouTube. It's up now. You can watch it now and replay this. And you guys are amazing. You know how much I love you. You guys take care and have a good week. Bye-bye.